for 5 and a fraction years in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a nice guy, you know. He made me comfortable with him, and we sort of became friends. And we traveled on the train to Memphis and got acquainted in the club car,
Mm-hmm.
which was an interesting thing because we closed up the club car with an FBI agent and bribed the steward to keep it open for a while. The FBI agent sat there and had drink for drink with us. But anyway, to get the story back to the Peabody, we went into Memphis together for the first time. And we went into the Peabody and we went into the liquor store, and you had to buy a bottle. And the only whiskey you could get was something I think they called White Feathers, or 4 Feathers, something like that. It was a cheap whiskey, and it wasn't so hot. I don't remember it. And it was more or less that they emphasized trying to sell the hard liquors instead of the beer, you know.
Yeah.
But you could get a bottle of beer, and that's what I drank most of the time. But any event, we went the second time, and we went in there the next week, I think, and we were together, and we sat down at the table, and we hadn't gotten our whiskey, our bottle yet. And this old fellow who was about the same age as Mountain, this fellow's chief's name was Mountain, came up and said, "Can I sit with you guys?" And this was sure. So he and Mountain had quite a conversation, you know. And I just sort of sat there and listened most of the time, but chiped in once in a while. And when he left, he says, "I'll get you some whiskey." And he went into the car and came back with one of the Kentucky brands, you know. It was good whiskey.
Yeah.
And he says, "Anytime you come in, ask around, and if I'm around, you'll be all right. I'll get it for you." And so when we finished that evening, he was all buddy with. He says, "If I can ever do anything for you, let me know," you know.
Right.
Fatherly sort of approach, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, "Gee, thanks," you know.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we saw him maybe 2 or 3 times later. But then I met Alice, and when we decided to get married, I mean, now what are we going to do for housing, you know?
Yeah.
Because that was during the war.
Yeah.
Tough. And I had shopped around, and I wasn't having any luck. So I thought, well, I'll call DeBrook. He's an old, I think he was one of the leading sales executives of the lumber company down there.
Did you ever see Broderick Crawford,
No.
movie star? Real tough guy.
Okay.
He looked just like him.
Yeah.
He was a big rough, you know, guy. And so I called him up, and he says, "Do you have any idea where I could find a place to live and want to get married?" And he said, "Well," he says, "that's quite a question." He says, "Let me work on it, and I'll call you back." He called me back, and he says, "Bring Alice with you, and we'll see if I might have something." He took us to he was separated from his wife. He took us to his home, in a nice little home out in the suburbs there of Memphis.
Yeah.
It was, we talked for about a half hour, you know, and then he said, "Well," he said, "my wife and I have talked." He says, "How would you like to live here?" And his wife says, "Sure, I got an extra bedroom." And so for $40 a month, we had a place to live.
Wow.
And she was so nice.
Yeah.
She said, "You got the run of the house, kitchen."
When she'd get a few too many drinks, she would start having a crying drunk son.
Yeah.
she'd start singing My Bill. That was her ex-husband's name.
She could play the piano and sing very nice.
Yeah, yeah.
We did the cooking.
But that's
Yeah.
that's where the luck we fell into there.
Yeah.
And that was during the war, and the blacks weren't allowed to walk down the sidewalk. They had to walk down the alley.
Wow.
And they
Yeah.
had to ride in the back of the bus.
Yeah.
And they called them niggers right to the face.
That was
awful.
long before the civil rights
It
bill.
was terrible.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that was about 20 years before the civil rights bill.
Yeah. Wow. So how long were you in? Did you stay in Memphis?
Well, I stayed there about. Let's see,
Till
we were
August, wasn't
we
it?
were married in April and I had to leave in August.
Okay.
Ex got orders for a ship.
Okay.
We got to California, the ship
Okay.
wasn't even built yet.
In the process,
Yeah.
and so they were training crews.
Yeah.
More than one ship was being built up
Yeah.
Sermon Island area, San Pedro, near Long Beach.
Yeah.
Long Beach was a big naval base in those days. But in any event, they were training the crew, and we got there in late August, I think. It was a wild time. The country was nuts then. All these new industries going, you know. I remember they had a school up in Port Hueneme, near Oxnard,
Yeah.
and they sent us to school, trained to maintain all the records and a lot of details about managing the medical department aboard ship, you know. And I was going up there every night. I'd leave. I'd leave at the house at about 3:30 in the morning, and I'd catch the train up to central Los Angeles to, I think it was the Hilton, and I'd plop myself down in a chair in the lobby until a fella come shake me and we'd get this car and he'd drive the rest of the way to Port Hueneme. Then we'd leave at night at about 5, and I'd get home about 7,
Wow.
7:30, and then we'd leave again about 3:30, 4:30.
Oh my
Did that
gosh.
for 2 weeks.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It was a crazy time. So all of the defense industries, building ships and everything was so busy,
Yeah.
and just people working everywhere.
You okay?
I'm gonna cry.
There you go.
That's her buddy.
Yeah.
And they trained the crew so fast. They brought us down off San Clemente, and we were practicing landings. And of course, those troop transports, you had to put the boats over and hoist them back again.
Oh, okay. For
Yeah,
troops or whatever.
yeah. And it was just nuts. You were moving so fast
Okay.
through the procedures.
Yeah.
I remember once we were out there, and they had a position on the ship called first lieutenant. One of his jobs was maintaining all the surface stuff on deck, the
Yeah.
boats. And we were doing a night, practicing at night, and he froze. He just had retreated into himself,
Okay.
form of schizophrenia, I guess.
Okay. How old was he?
Oh, he was about 30, probably about 32.
Okay.
But they had called him to put him on with this job
Yeah.
of all this heavy equipment and landings.
Yeah.
When his experience had been small craft sailing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow or another they picked him for this heavy duty job.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it was just too much for him.
Sure.
It was really very rigorous.
Did they have exams and stuff? I mean, did they have as they were training people? Did they have exams or tests as they went through, or was it?
Oh, they had. I never took a written test.
Yeah.
For one thing, they put you in my category, they put you in a slot where you were already supposed to be trained.
Okay.
And
Yes.
at least enough to adopt. Now, I'd never been aboard a troop transport before,
Yeah.
but I had been aboard a lot of other ships,
Yeah.
about a half a dozen.
Yeah.
And so the maintenance, the medical department, and the organization was the same on all.
Okay.
But then you were thrown into, like, training the crew.
Yeah.
One of the first things you did was you got involved in giving first aid instruction to all the crew.
Okay.
And they give each division had sent a squad of men, you know.
Yeah.
And then you'd have your own organization where I was the only one that had been at sea in the 14 of the medical department.
Okay.
Had 2 doctors and 12 hospital corpsmen. They'd never been on a ship before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you were real busy getting them familiar with the organization and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
But there was no problem. They all worked, boy. Might have been draftees, but
Yeah.
I mean, volunteers most.
Okay.
A few of the draftees, maybe. And they were all good. Hard workers.
Yeah.
I remember one of them was a sheep herder at Montana.
Really?
And then he worked alongside of another fellow who had been a storekeeper somewhere. So I put them in medical stores. The sheep herder had real muscles. He could load those boxes around. And then but they had a registered pharmacist for the pharmacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they had a lab guy who had been to lab school.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of specialists
Yeah.
who their particular duties they could do. It was getting used to ship's organization
Sure.
and the routine that
Yeah.
they had to fall in line with. And they fell in line quick.
Yeah.
Everything went fine.
Yeah.
We left in well, I guess it was probably somewhere around 1st of January, maybe. We went to sea and picked up, we went went to Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
February we were landing Marines at Iwo Jima and taking casualties off. That's how fast things developed in those days.
Mm-hmm.
That ship had been in the dry dock, you know, in August,
Yeah.
getting built.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got on that subject, but we got back way off. Something.
Yeah.
My grandfather was in the Navy, and he was a little older, and in fact, my grandmother was pregnant with my dad, who was the oldest son, and in upstate New York, and so he volunteered, even though he knew that my grandmother was pregnant, whatever. But he just volunteered, and he went into the Navy, and he had a pretty good experience. He liked it. He liked the organization and stuff like that, and he was on whatever kind of the small boat was that was out in front, of a caravan or whatever, and he would listen because they didn't really have radar. But he said that he listened to sonar, and he'd listen for a ting back or something like that. And I guess it was a deal where he would just sit with headphones for a couple hours every day. And then if you heard a plunk, then you would hit the alarm or something like that. But he heard one plunk and he hit the alarm. But he says that they never had any actual, combat or whatever with U-boats or whatever that was. They never, and all the time that he was out there, and it was I think it was in the Pacific. They didn't see any actual warfare or whatever. I guess he was just very lucky, but that was his experience, and he liked it, and so he, my dad was born in 1941, and so I think he volunteered sometime in late 1941, I guess, something like that. But he had a good experience. He liked it.
Well, that's good. The Navy it was a good slot for people that liked the work they were doing.
Yeah.
But it was awfully demanding on married life.
Okay.
Very demanding on married life.
Sure.
That was the worst time of our marriage, really.
Yeah.
They said they had sent me to school because I was home 4 nights a week.
Yeah.
I was at school. I come home on Friday night and leave early Sunday.
Okay.
That was for 10 months.
Yeah.
Then turned around and they sent me to sea, and I only got home once in 2 years.
Yeah.
Leaving mom with 6 kids.
Yeah.
That can tear you up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of life is. You had streaks like that, and it makes you angry sometimes.
Yeah.
That they would do that because they could have done something different. They could have given me the sea duty.
Yeah.
But they could have given it to me where there was a base where I'd be home part of the time when the ship
Sure.
was home ported,
Yeah.
It was. But you do what they assign you, and sometimes you don't like what they give you, and sometimes you do.
Yeah.
But I was career-minded because I was a depression kid.
Okay.
I wanted security.
Yeah. Yeah. My mother's parents are both Irish, and my mother's father, that was like the Irish American thing was, he'd be a teacher or a lot of police officers, because the Irish didn't really care about enforcing the law any more than anybody else did, but it was really security. So my grandfather became a mailman. He was very concerned with security. It was their parents that came across from Ireland, so they weren't first generation or anything like that. But yeah, it was during the Depression, so he was very concerned with security.
Mailman was a good job during the Depression. And
Yeah.
They were steady jobs.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, we had one mailman that all the time, the years I lived in Kansas City, so I was about 16.
Yeah.
I remember the same
Same.
mailman.
Yeah.
They never switched him around.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that had, anybody that had, they had security because there was always a paycheck coming.
Yeah.
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 That's why my stepfather finally got himself into the post office.
Okay.
He got into it part-time. And then finally they got him in 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
But when you were part-time, you got stuck with all the night hours and the overtime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom's father would ride on the train between New York City and I think Newburgh, New York, which was upstate, and would ride on the train. And on the train, the mail bags would come from New York, and then he would sort the mail on the train into different cubby holes.
Yes.
And then they would take them out of the cubby holes and put them in the bag, and then put the bag out, and the ding, 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 and the hook would hook the bag at full speed. And so once a year he had to take an exam where they would time you with a stopwatch. And so in the basement, even when I was a little kid, they had a big wall, and he made one himself. He made a model of the real thing, and he'd have dummy letters with all the different, I guess it was before zip codes or whatever, with all the different addresses of the different towns, and he would start the stopwatch and put them all in there so he could make sure he could pass the test.
I know exactly what he was doing.
Really?
Saying, because
Yeah.
my stepdad did the same thing.
Really?
He had one at home.
Really?
And he
didn't
kept
say.
having trouble.
Yeah.
He would not meet the deadline,
Yeah.
and he was really discouraged.
Yeah.
And then finally he came home one day and he passed.
Okay.
And it's funny, kind of funny story about that, because our family was always, my mother and my stepdad too, I guess, were raised in families where there was no liquor, you know.
Yeah.
It just wasn't, nobody was drinking. It was against the, with mother, she was just part of the church that they went to, you know.
Yeah.
And it was a custom that just was, of course, there was no liquor in the house.
Yeah.
Well, they came through with, the first thing when they did away with Prohibition, well, they had, liquor was flowing around, but they started selling the beer
Mm-hmm.
at 3.2%.
Okay.
And one of the postal men told my stepfather, "Why don't you relax? You're all uptight every time you take this thing.
Yeah.
Have a bottle of beer before the exam."
Yeah.
Well, my stepfather was, I don't know how much he drank before he got married, but he never had an ounce.
Right.
But in any event, he passed. It relaxed him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Good story about alcohol. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a positive tool.
Yeah, 3.2.
Did they call that near beer or something like that? or-
No, near beer you could buy during Prohibition.
Oh, okay.
It was just beer without alcohol, is what it
Yeah.
was.
It's
Oh,
like the
all right.
non-alcoholic beer. It still
Okay.
has a tiny bit, but not really. It wouldn't ever do anything to you.
Yeah. You'd never drink enough to.
I can remember when I was about 8 years old, I think. I went somewhere. I always was a small town kid during the summer.
Yeah.
Visited my grandparents.
Yeah.
And then when school started, I went back to the big city. Big for that area, anyway. And they were going somewhere during the summer. It must have been about 1934, because my grandmother had died that winter. And so my aunt and my grandfather went to Lacy, Kansas. And on our way back to this little town of Stanley, they stopped for some refreshment, and my grandfather ordered, he just said beer, I think. And he meant root beer,
Mm-hmm.
because he was accustomed to that was all that was there, you know. They delivered him a near beer,
Yeah.
and he laughed, you know. He had spent his early years in Texas, so I'm sure he might have had a beer once. But in any event, he drank it by man and had a fit, because he drank his near beer.
Right.
I watched them do the work. And, you know, the brake bands aren't on the wheels, they were on the transmission.
Oh, okay. Right.
And you had that pedal that you pushed when you pushed on the brake, it would
Okay.
slow the transmission.
Okay.
Well, anyway, they got worn down. You didn't have any brakes, so I went to Montgomery Ward. It became my turn, and I went over there and got the brake pads and brought them back and put them in. And then we started down the street. It was a street with sort of a T. There was a deep, steep hill, and then you hit bottom. It was where this street fed in. And there was no street ahead, but there was an alley. And when you went in that alley, you went about quarter of a block, and then you turned and went up behind the houses, you know. And so I got down there, and the brakes wasn't stopping. All I could smell was oil.
Yeah.
You're supposed to oil them a little bit. I oiled them too much. Well, I went into that thing and went through a chicken coop. What a disaster. Fortunately, the guy didn't have any chickens. It was sort of a rundown thing.
Yeah.
He didn't get too angry with me. But anyway, it was a touring car type.
Okay.
And we used that thing for about 2 years, I guess, all over the place.
Yeah.
We had some real adventures with that thing. We went down to the Missouri Ozarks, and we got between two hills, and it wouldn't make it up either one.
Yeah.
Coming
Oh
out,
no.
we were down in the valley.
Yeah.
And so we backed up. It had more power backing up than it did front ways. Finally got back up to the top of the hill and headed for home. And I had the same experience later as a kid. I was about 17, and I got a job as delivery boy for a restaurant out here in kind of a high-tone part of town. And I was delivering to the expensive apartment buildings and stuff. And same thing happened to me. I got between two hills and couldn't get back up either one. And so I couldn't back it out either. So I called up the restaurant, and that guy was mad. But finally I had delivered my meal.
Yeah.
But they had to come and get me, and then I guess hire somebody to tow it out. And then I went back the next day, and they didn't want me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then they graduated to the Model A, and we went to Missouri Ozarks again, which was about a 3-hour drive from town. It was a good, reliable automobile.
Yeah.
Never had any problems with that Model A.
Yeah.
It had the little rumble seat, and 2 could sit in there and 3 in front. And they'd let me drive when they didn't want to drive.
Yeah.
I remember I got to drive home at night.
Yeah.
The Ozarks.
What were the headlights like?
On Saturday night when we went out on Blue Ridge, just outside the city limits, they had little taverns out there. And I had not developed a liking for beer. Beer had become legal, but I had tasted some home brew, and it had. So I drank Coca-Cola, and they drank beer moderately. They were a German family, they liked beer. And I get to drive home on Saturday night, because they were generous guys. They would let you drive. Very, very nice fellows.
Yeah.
Tell them about the time their mother was listening to the shortwave to Hitler.
Their mother, yeah. Their father and mother were from Germany. They were immigrants. And the father had been in the German army during World War I. And he had been gassed after they came over here. They had the 2 youngest, that the two oldest kids. But then they had one every 2 years, I guess, and he died early. So she was left with 3 boys and 2 girls. And they were just about 2 years apart. And when I first met them, I lived up with the alley and across from them. And so I knew them from elementary school all the way to the time I joined the Navy. The fact is, they were the ones that took me out and took on a little goodbye celebration. And they were just so nice, that family.
Yeah.
But she'd listen to the, I'd be down at their house and Hitler would be on the radio.
Wow.
And she'd say, "Schwein! He's going to start another war!" She called him Schwein. That was one of her favorite words. She liked to keep a clean house. And they had a ground floor, which was the family. That was the rumpus end of the house. They had a kitchen and a sort of a living room type, and then a dining room in the basement, really. You walk in the back to that. Then they had 2 more floors above that, and that's where they had the bedrooms and a nice living room, I guess. The only time I ever got in that part of the house is when the kid would invite me up to his bedroom for a short while.
Yeah.
But she kept that house immaculate.
Yeah.
And I'd go down there and the kids would be running out of the house and if they'd walked in on a wet floor, Schwein! Yell at him, Schwein! Get out of here!
Tell us the story about when you guys met.
Oh, that story, you've heard that one.
I know, but he hasn't heard that one.
Well, I had a car that was a lemon. It was a Plymouth, 38 Plymouth is that I bought off a lot there. And every time I drive anywhere at all, hardly, you might go a mile or 2 miles and then quit. You coast over the side of the road, 15, 20 minutes and start again. And sometimes it lasts, for another dozen miles and it'd be all right. Well, I got tired of that, and so I told my roommate, I said, I'm going to take this down to a garage in Millington and have them try to find out what's wrong with this thing. So we drove down there and parked it, and then he said, well, now what do we do? So it was probably along about 6 o'clock in the evening or something like that. I forgot the exact time. Well, down here on the highway, he said there's a little tavern down there. Well, we walked down there. That was the main north-south highway from Memphis going north. And we went in there and met Alice. She was in there, and her friend was with her. And I recognized her as being a nurse in the hospital. But I'd never spoken to her. And my buddy was the chief master at arms of the hospital. And he had sort of the police chief of the hospital, The only time I'd ever seen Alice was when they were having an argument. He was having an argument with her in the hallway. And I got to that, and when we got back to that room that night, I said, what were you arguing with that nurse today about? He said, oh, I drafted some of the convalescent patients off of her ward for outside detail. And says she was giving me help for taking them. So that's the only time I'd ever seen Alice, but I recognized her right away. And she was in there dancing with a couple of fellows from the Navy to a jukebox. And the place wasn't any bigger than this room and that room.
Yeah.
It was just a little place that operated. They had a little tiny bar, like it might be a bar across the door there or something. And a little short order and potato chips and stuff. So at any event, we danced around and we asked him to dance, and I danced with. I said, I'll pick the one you were arguing with. So I started dancing with Alice. He took the other one, you know.
Yeah.
And so we got acquainted just there in that little area. And there was, then it got toward the end of the evening, and I don't know, Maureen must have had a car, didn't she?
She did.
But anyway, Alice and I ended up in this, I don't know what, we didn't go back with her.
No. Some drinking there.
Well, there was a civilian there. I don't know, she must have left early or something.
Yeah.
Where she disappeared to, I never knew.
Yeah.
But in any event, after about 2 hours, there was a civilian in the place.
Mhm.
And we were, I think, there were only about 6 of us in the place.
Mhm.
But he had been drinking before he ever came in. But he was one of the friendly drunks, you know. Gushed all over us, wanted to be friends. And so we were humoring him and let him sit at the table. But what the part I'm skipping is, these 2 Navy fellows that they were with, sailors that they'd been sitting at the
They
table
didn't
with,
know we were nurses.
they got angry because we were asking them to dance all the time. And one got real huffy about it and said it's got to stop. And so Tom Sawyer, my buddy, he says, well, maybe we need to talk about this, you know. And so into the restroom we go. Wham! Tom, one punch and the guy was on the floor. He says, you have any issues now or something to that effect? No, he didn't. They left. It wasn't a drunken brawl or anything. I was amazed when he hit him. I found out that Tom had been a Golden Glove boxer before he joined the Navy. Well, in any event, time to come home, and so we didn't have any transportation apparently. And somehow or another, Tom asked this fellow if he had a car or something. He says, yeah, but he couldn't drive, obviously. So Tom and he sat in the front seat. Alice and I sat in the back seat. We drove back to the front gate of the hospital and parked the car on the road with the odor still asleep in it and went back in. And that's how we met. Well, we didn't see each other. I was a pre-war Navy guy, and when you worked, the rule was corpsmen don't date Navy nurses when I joined, you know. And so I thought to myself, gee whiz, I had a nice time. But I think I'll just skip following up, you know. And but I had the office, which was up on the 2nd floor, and it was remote from the rest of the hospital. And so I never saw her. But I had the medical records, among other things, and I reviewed all of the record hospital. They had typists who had been stenographers and stuff in private industry, and they were the gals, you know.
Yeah.
And they could go 90 to 100 words a minute, but they didn't know the Navy format or anything.
Yeah.
And they were particularly ignorant of medical terms. And so it was a process of teaching them the Navy format and the medical terms and stuff like that. So I always reviewed their typewritten record before I went out to the doctor for signature. And here I come across, it was Alice Morris. I said, oh, there's that nurse I was dancing with a month before, you know.
Mhm.
Then I saw her birthday, 3/12/20. I thought, gee, that's a coincidence. Mine's 2/12/20. And it was her birthday. And I thought, well, maybe she'd come out on her birthday. I'll ask her. I walked down and asked her if she'd go out. She consented to go out with me. That's why
I
it
told
started.
another guy I'd go out with him, and a Navy officer, and he'd been getting cozy with all the nurses, and then when they got to like him, he'd dump them.
Uh-huh.
So he came over for me, and they're hollering, Miss Morris, and I'm seeking out the back door to meet Dad.
Well, I thought it, even though there was loads of women all over the place, and there was dating all over the place, I made it a practice not to go out with the nurses. I went out with one wave that I did because the personnel officer wanted to. I got to find out what you boys are. Who you going with? Tom Sawyer fixed me up with a wave that worked for him, but I wasn't going to do it with any of the gals who worked in my office. I didn't just thought it wasn't good practice. But so I thought, well, it's still not a good idea to be showing this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we met in the gatehouse, and really, there were very few people who knew that we were going out together. I think maybe a nurse or two that she knew, and my roommate knew it. But it wasn't spreading the word around at all. But when she went out to the gatehouse, they had a little anti-room with a bunk in it, you know. She'd wait in there until I drove up, and then she'd get in my car, and away we go. When I came back, the same procedure.
Mm-hmm.
People didn't know we were going together.
Yeah.
Until I decided, until after I had asked her to marry me, and she said yes. Then
I said, ask me when you're not drinking.
yeah, I had to. The only two times I was seen with her on the base, and not many people saw me then, was when I was in my room, and I think it was on a Sunday afternoon or something. And I was laying there, and I was thinking, she's turned me down a couple of times because I'd been drinking. But drinking was only a couple of drinks. But she was no way. Every time she'd say, you know how you've been drinking? Tom was there, and I said, I think I'm going to over there and ask her to marry me when I haven't had a drink. So he said, you're crazy. I walked over there and went to the ward, and she came up to meet me. And I asked her, and she said yes.
I said, pardon me?
Yeah, you said, pardon me, but then I had to say it twice. I had to ask her twice.
Where was it that you?
I think it was in the diet kitchen.
Yeah, in the diet kitchen. We're in there kissing each other.
Oh.
But that's a story of our wrote. But in those days, well, I think each date was never longer than about 2 hours long, was it?
Yeah.
Because we were both working. She was on night duty when we got married.
Yeah, worked all night. It was giddy when I was walking up the aisle and dragging them along.
And in addition to my regular job, they had a very complicated procedure they called works and boards. You did all this paperwork and swearing in, and it was all legal stuff from every new doctor that came into the Navy. And they had these, during the war, of course, they were getting new doctors a lot who were volunteering. coming into the Navy. I got the job of doing all that paperwork. And they had a procedure before the war. I had done it before I met her. And the guy had me working till 1 o'clock in the morning until the same job. He'd been a prison medical guy. You typed it, but if you weren't allowed to make any erasers.
Oh.
And it drove me nuts, but it, you know, to go through a bunch of stuff and to having typed it
Yeah.
and have to make a mistake somewhere on a page and then do the whole thing over again.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way he was. So he had gone to sea. He was an officer, and I got the job of doing it. And this wave that was my witness when we got married helped me out. She was a good typist and a good worker, and we got through about 7:30 or 8 every night.
Yeah.
Because I said, this is for the birds, that type of business. I made out stencils.
Yeah.
And had fill-in places. And you had to get it good,
Yeah.
but I had learned how to do it pretty well.
Yeah.
So we got through it early, but nevertheless, I was working 14, 16 hours a day at times.
Yeah.
And we were slipping a couple hours in the evening when we were both catching get away, you know.
Yeah.
But we were doing it at least about 5 nights a week, I think,
Yeah.
for about 3 weeks before we settled it. Before she said she would marry me. But then the next thing procedure was, she says, but you've got to learn what you're in for if you're going to be marrying a Catholic girl. And so she took me down to this church in Memphis and knocked on the door. And we were lucky we had a nice old priest. Well, I wonder what you're here for. We were both in uniform. But he grilled me, he put me through the paces for, now they want to do it for a year, for crying out loud.
Sure.
4 nights did it. But I had to hurry up baptismal certificate from my mother. But after 4 evenings with him, he said, I'll marry you.
Yeah.
I think it was just being patriotic. Because he had to get the bishop's permission to do it on an Easter Sunday.
Oh, really?
A live priest would hardly believe me when I tell them we were married on Easter Sunday. That don't happen, they say.
Why did it have to be on Easter Sunday?
Well, that was a Sunday he picked.
Oh, okay.
He said, I'll marry you on a Sunday, but he got permission to do it
Yeah.
because that was a big Sunday where they're going to have a big,
Yeah.
and he picked, it wasn't during Mass, it was right after Mass, the midday Mass, and he announced to the congregation that it was going to happen. Anybody who wanted to see us get married could stay, and quite a lot of people stayed.
Wow.
And we had the benefit of their organist.
She played Here Comes the Bride. And I'm giddy dragging him up the aisle.
And we had made it known to a number of people then we were going to get married. And only some of them showed up because there's another St. Mary's where they went to.
Yeah.
There was no big formalities.
Yeah.
The priest's name was Father Natalis Wellner. Natalis means Christmas. We were married on Easter. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
He was
So,
a
did you-
real big guy. He looked like Friar Tuck. Big heavy eyebrows. When he rang the doorbell to tell me he wanted to get married, He says, I wonder what you two want.
Yeah. So how much longer did you stay in the Navy?
Then
Only a couple of days.
the
Okay.
rules,
That's
they
what I
had to, they were the regular Navy, the nurses couldn't stay in.
Yeah.
They still have the pre-war rules.
Yeah.
They changed them about 2 months later.
Okay.
Because we went to a wedding of a chief and a nurse, and they commuted to work together every morning.
Wow.
But she had to retire.
Yeah.
She had put her retirement letter was, I guess they typed it for her in her office. I retire and reason marriage, period.
Yeah.
That was
the
the old
day
Navy.
after the wedding, his front tooth fell out. And he's going, don't look at me. Don't look at me. And I said, why? He says, my tooth fell out. I got to go over and see the dentist.
Those were crazy days.
Yeah. What year was it that you got married?
44.
44. That's right.
69 years ago.
Yeah.
But I figured, well, I ought to tell my personnel officer. So I went to him, and he took me into the executive officer's office and says, Chief Lacy's going to marry one of our Navy nurses. And he, well, that's fine. Give me a big handshake. Congratulations. And then he took me in to see the commanding officer. And I told him, Chief Lacy's marrying one of our Navy nurses. Well, wonderful. Congratulations, Chief. And shook my hand. She was catching hell.
Yeah.
She was a part American Indian. And the guy that Dex took him in to see said that when she was overseas, she used to date all the enlisted men. She was yelling at me for getting married, you know.
Yeah. Could
The
Navy
guy that I
nurses be?
stood up saw me dancing with Dex after
Yeah.
we were married. And he stops and looks at me, and I went, showed him my ring. So he went
Were
away.
Navy nurses allowed to be married if they were married to civilians? You just couldn't be married because you were
No, they weren't supposed to be married.
married at all. Okay.
The regular Navy nurses.
Yeah.
But I heard that I think that reservists could,
Okay.
if they were in the reserve.
Yeah.
The Navy nurses were glad I stood him up because he'd been mean to all of them.
Yeah.
They were all calling my name and nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, those were crazy days. Took off and flew around the city limits and then landed again for a month. I didn't land a plane again until even though I was attached to aviation squadrons, I was ground crew. I would the PBYs had a crew of about 7 normally. But they were all trained for flight.
Mm-hmm.
They had mechanics and the ground crew, maintenance crews, and all of that. Whereas these were with the squadron, of course, but when it come to flying, you didn't fly. I think it was in, I flew twice in the PBYs. Once that we had been in there's a group of islands just east and maybe a little north from Australia. New Caledonia,
Okay.
where we'd first gone from Hawaii to support the Guadalcanal operation.
Mhm.
And that's where the admiral that was in command of that was based on the ship called the Oregon. So they were establishing a seaplane base there. And we were there for probably about 6 weeks, and they moved. I got moved up to, with the squadron, to the Espiritu Santos Islands. And was living on a seaplane tender, and they had landing area marked in the bay for the seaplanes.
Mhm.
And the squadrons didn't have, those planes didn't have wheels. So I don't remember the particular reason why, but some reason I had to go back down to the New Caledonia to straighten out something. It had to do with records or something. And a plane was going down there, so I went on it. It was the commanding officer of our squadron was flying the plane. Oh, I don't remember what they went down. They'd had a big battle up at Guadalcanal, and a lot of our ships had been sunk, and others were in the process of sinking if they didn't get pumped out. And so we flew down there to pick up a pump to bring back. There's some destroyer that needed us to pump out water in their bilges. So I went on that trip. That's one trip, and then they had a plane went in south of the Guadalcanal there somewhere, and it had been, for some reason or other, whether I run out of fuel or the engines conked out on them. It was a torpedo plane that had a crew of 3. It had the gunner, the rear radioman, and a pilot. And they'd run out of fuel and they had to land, and there was a little island there, and their plan was to land in the water and bounce up onto the beach. But when he hit the water, there was some coral there, and the prop caught some of that coral and flipped it over on its back. And the pilot was killed, but the 2 crewmen got out.
Yeah.
And I flew up the plane to rescue those guys.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And they came out in a, it scared the heck out of us that time because there was heavy swells, and the pilot had to land between the swells
Yeah.
so that he wouldn't land nose first into a swell.
Yeah.
we circled and tried about 3 times, and finally he sat it down, and we taxied up close enough to the beach that they came out in their rubber boat. The 2 crewmen had managed to salvage and to our plane and got in it, and there had been 2 natives that were with them in the boat. And they weren't happy. They had a free boat. They were grinning and laughing when they went back. But they weren't able to get the pilot out. The
Wow.
plane was on its back.
Yeah.
Tell them about the time you wanted to go up in an airplane to get air pay. And this old guy asked you if you'd like to, he asked you if you wanted to go up with this officer that wanted to get some flying time.
Well, that was in later years. There was when I'd been in between. I'd had 3 years in the Naval Hospital in Philadelphia. But then I went to what they call an attack squadron up in Quonset Point, Rhode Island. And it was a single-engine plane with a crew of 1. It didn't have it just had the pilot But it was a combination plane, a bomber and fighter, and a Strafer, called them ADs, attack. They were an attack plane. And so we went aboard the Philippine Sea and went to the Mediterranean for 6 months. And the ground crew, at times, if you could get a certain amount of flight time in with them for one reason or another, they give you a half skin, they call it, half flight pay for a month. But you had to put in a certain mission to get it. And I kept saying, well, I'm ground crew too, why can't I do this, you know? And they just say, well, we haven't come up with a reason why you can fly, you know? So the one when we put in I think we were in North Africa. And there was a French air base in about 30 miles from the harbor. And the squadron flew over there. And the flight surgeon came to me and said, I'm not going, but they need somebody in case somebody needs some emergency medical treatment, you go. So, okay, I got my first aid kit and away we went and got a free ride over there in a bus with the ground crew. And we spent about 4 or 5 days there at the French Air Base. And, but I went down to the hangar usually with the guys every day, and I got at the hangar, fixed scratches, bruises, whatever was a bit needed. But I had nothing much to do, and then the commanding officer of the squadron came to me and said, you've been wanting to go up, but we haven't had it. How'd you like to go up today? He says, we have a flight that you could go on, and I'll give you my gear. So he gave me his helmet and his parachute and his jacket, and took me out and strapped me in the back of this big trainer plane, SNJ, which advanced training, the trainers fly. And so I'm sitting very comfortable in his rear seat, you know. And I see this guy coming out to the plane, and there's this old gray-headed man coming out, you know. Crawls into the front. He says, how you doing back there? And I said, I'm fine. He says, then we take off and go on a sightseeing trip all around North Africa there.
Wow.
Every once in a while he'd say, how you doing back there? I said, divine, you know what I was going to say. So we land again, and everything went good. I got a nice trip. And this old gent gets out and walks away. Go back in the hangar, and said, the commanding officer said, well, he says, everything went pretty good, huh? I said, yes. He says, you know who that was? I said, no, Admiral Sherman, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet.
Oh my God.
I said, yeah, in case of a crash, I was available, huh?
Yeah. Wow.
He didn't want to go up with him.
No.
There was an American Indian in the U.S. Navy, and he was an admiral. What was his name?
Nah, I can't think of it right now. Yeah, he was, he was aboard the ship. We brought his flag aboard the ship. And when we were cruising back and forth in the Mediterranean there, he was been an academy graduate. He was the only American Indian that went to the academy pre-war, anyway. And he was been commanding officer of a carrier during World War II, and all that hot stuff was going on, you know,
Wow.
in the Marianas and to the Pacific there. And then he'd made Rear Admiral, and he was not the commanding officer of the he wasn't in command of the whole Mediterranean fleet area, but he was the commanding officer of the task force that included the carrier and various other ships.
Yeah.
But he came down to the chief's quarters with his home movies of the big battle they had out there in the Marianas.
Oh, wow.
The one they called the Mariana Turkey Shoot, where they shot down so many Japanese planes.
Okay.
They kind of broke the back of the Japanese Air Force,
Okay.
of their experienced pilots.
All right.
And so he brought it, he came down there with his projector and somebody to run it. And then he promptly fell asleep. We watched about an hour of the movie. It was nice. Restaurant, and when the policeman came in and said, "You got to get back to the base," we went back, and the base said, "We don't need you. Come on back," because the ship was along the dock. We all had our stuff aboard, you know. But then, when we went back that night, we were supposed to be going to Iceland. And the fellow came back during the early morning hours and said, "Hey, we're not going north, we're going south." That's how fast things change.
Yeah. Wow.
Took us to Norfolk, put us on a train. And why they didn't put us on a train in Providence, Rhode Island, I'll never know. But I guess that's how fast things changed. It took us off at Norfolk, put us on a train, which took us all the way to San Francisco. It was a troop train. There wasn't anything but military on it. I passed within sight of the roof of our house where we lived.
Really?
We couldn't get it. They couldn't even make a phone call those days.
Yeah. Then what did they do with you?
Oh, they put us on a ship and we went to Pearl Harbor, we went to the Kaneohe Air Station.
How long did it take to get there?
It took quite a while. December 7th. It took about, we weren't there until about 3 weeks
Okay.
altogether. The ship they put us on that took us there was an old, they had chartered an old transport, commercial transport, you know. It was run by a commercial crew. But the Army had chartered it. And so the passengers were a mix of Army, Navy, Marines.
Did it have places to sit or?
Well, they had, they, you know, and then what happened in cargo holds, they converted it to bunks.
Okay.
And so you had bunks 3 high,
Yeah.
all the way around. And I guess in the middle too. And each hold, then they had bunks everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you only got 2 meals a day,
Yeah.
and it was pretty much boiled. That somebody was making money probably,
Yeah.
because all we got was pretty much hot dogs and boiled potatoes
Yeah.
twice a day.
Yeah.
That's where I first met the boss that I had in Memphis. He was an officer when I hit Memphis, but he was not yet a chief then, and I was just third class. But I was walking through a corridor, passageway, and the Southern Front Navy uniform was coming at me, and I saw he was a pharmacist mate, I had the little caduceus on it. But I didn't know where he was headed. I didn't say anything. And then he saw me, I guess, on my sleeve, and turned around and said, "Hey, where are you going?" I don't remember where I was going. But I was only getting 2 meals a day, and then the rest of the time in the bunk, or watching somebody gamble,
Yeah.
Throwing dice and stuff. And so I told him, he says, you wanted some good food? And I said, sure, of course. He said, I landed a good job working for the Army doctor here.
Okay. Yeah.
And he said, we got a couple of guys sick up there. But he said, how'd you like to come up and do whatever there is to do? And mostly it was a few medications, and you'll bring them the food from the galley.
Yeah.
But we got 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
And we ate what the crew was eating.
Good promotion.
So I had a good last week aboard that thing.
Yeah.
It was funny to run him as I never saw him again until I hit Memphis.
Yeah.
He remembered me, though. He was a lieutenant then.
So how long were you in the Navy before Pearl Harbor?
I was just there with the, well, I went in September, a little over 2 years.
Oh, okay.